Welcome to the Creative Condition podcast, an ongoing series of conversations and considerations to help people understand and embrace their own unique creativity for fulfilling lives and brilliant careers. My name is Ben Talon. I'm an illustrator and author, and I bring 16 years of creative industry experience working with the New York Times, The Guardian, the Premier League, and more. And I invite designers, artists, psychologists, scientists, coaches, athletes, sensitivity experts, and all kinds of thought leaders to help us broaden our knowledge of creativity. Creativity is a fundamental pillar of human happiness, a vital ingredient in the solutions to our problems, but so often misunderstood. The show is supported by founding sponsor and B Corp, Illustration X. Take a look at their stunning range of illustrators and animators at illustrationx.com. If you like the music for the show, it's by Dirty Freud, who you can listen to now on Spotify and all good music streaming services.
I think the time thing is slightly for judo when because you are set, you do it to the clock, like you've got a 5-minute fight or whatever, so you know sort of how long you are, and you'll always look up when you get brought together and the referee pauses you, brings you back to the centre or whatever. With judo, when you're fighting, it is kind of potentially slightly different to other fighting sports in that it's maybe 15, 20, 30, max 40-second bursts of like energy and like craziness. But then you get paused because either you're heading out the area or you're not progressing on the ground or whatever, or someone has a penalty, and you get brought back to the centre, and that's in that time the coaches are allowed to speak to you while you're fighting. It's changed over the years, the rules. So previously coaches have been able to speak to you while you're fighting. There's a game that we used to play at school called The Game, and if you think of the game, you've lost the game. That's the game, and I feel like that's somewhat like this, in that if you become aware that you're in flow state or optimal performance state or whatever you think it, the minute you become aware of it, you stray away from it, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And I've had that before, where you almost have that internal monologue of like, I'm going to win this fight. This is going well, I'm going to win this. And then, but you become aware of that internal monologue, and you're like, no, I need to get back to almost the no monologue state. And it's what you find is it's like an internal psychological struggle. Put aside all the physical stuff you're getting beaten the hell out of, and like you're really knackered or whatever. You're trying to fight the internal monologue of like trying to not succumb to the pressure of coaches, spectators, your own pressures, and you sort of hyping yourself up. On like one side, that's the negativity stuff, all the way through to the positive self-talk of, I'm going to win this. He's weak, he's tired, I'm stronger. Like, that's good self-talk, but you're not concentrating on the task at hand, which is that flow state. And good examples of that are when I've won fights and I've had to watch back, and it goes to that kind of autonomous state. I've won fights and you have to watch the video back to know exactly what happened, because you kind of knew, I'd known that I threw them or I landed in a certain position. But it's the video that you watch to really go through, oh, okay, cool, I did that thing. And inevitably, that's the thing that I've trained. I would go beyond 1,000 times. I'd go closer to tens of thousands of times. It's the movement that you've trained. And again, something that I often say is practice makes permanent, not perfect. So if you practice in a focused way to create perfection, that will make it permanent. But if you don't, and that's why training hours are so important, in that you've got to train in a perfect way, because if you do it imperfectly, you will execute that imperfect thing in the heat of the moment when you're trying to be autonomous. Doing A-level PE, you speak about motor programs, and it's the video cassette in your head. It just goes and you do it.
Yeah.
And so that's something that you aspire to as an athlete. And this is where I'm very biased with fight sports, in that motor program, that videotape will only show you one permeation or one circumstance of a million different circumstances you might encounter in a fight because of a slightly different grip, a slightly stronger opponent, taller, shorter, whatever. So that's why I love the sport that I do, because it is so varied, and you always have to adapt. You can go in with a fight plan, tactics, whatever, but during the fight you have to be adaptable. And again, that's where the flow state is useful. You're just reacting without thinking. Because if I start thinking too much that this person's a left-handed fighter and I need to circle that way, and then I need to do the thing that I do, to I'm not in that flow state. I'm only working one step at a time. I'm reacting to the thing that person's doing, rather than in that flow state where I'm in 100% control. Even though it's a 50-50 thing, I know exactly what's going to happen next because I've drilled that thing 1,000 times. And 1,000 times my opponent will do that same thing for me to do the throw or whatever.
You remain adaptable enough to apply that to the circumstance at hand, which is bringing mindfulness into. Which I guess, I don't know a great deal about martial arts, but that's one of my readings of martial arts from the outside looking in, is that there is a great degree of mental strength.
Yeah, I think so. Judo, I would say, if you try and draw the boundary between martial arts and sport, I would say judo sort of falls more on the sport boundary, but some people and some clubs, some groups do train the martial sense, if you like, the martial arts sense. The key thing is the resilience element, in that, some of the best fighters you will see will, and I was bad for it, I would often stop. And it comes back to that statement in there, that the need to avoid failure. Some of the best fighters they flip it. It's the need to achieve, the need to keep going. And what that looks like is someone will come in for a throw and someone will defend it. Instead of coming out and losing your dominance of position or your effort, say it's, conservation of effort, they'll then turn it into a different technique. Person will defend again, they'll turn it into a different technique, person will defend again. And it's a relentless onslaught of attack. And that's because they're not afraid of what their opponent's going to do, because they've got an answer to it. It's a physical form of chess. That need to avoid failure isn't just, and again, you'll know this, isn't just during the fight. That need to avoid failure almost starts all the way back to your competition prep. The way you prepare for the competition needs to be in such a way that you don't have those intrusive thoughts. If you're doing the positive self-talk, that's fine. But what's quite devastating and difficult to come back from is the intrusive negative thoughts. That's almost like a bit of a killer, because I know the minute I start thinking, I'm tired, he's looking strong. That throw almost caught me, and and I talk about it a lot in work, in my current job. But language is really important, and I've had exposure to lots of sports psychologists, and a really simple example that was used for me is, if you've got someone hanging onto a rope and you're shouting at them, "Don't let go, don't let go, don't let go." The message they're hearing is kind of let go, let go, let go, rather than hold on tight, and the reinforcing message there is hold tight. And so it's coaching yourself to it's almost like, I don't know, it's almost like learning experiences. Like if my opponent almost catches me, I don't think, oh shit, this guy's going to beat me. It's, okay, cool, I'm going to counter that. I know what to do now. I'm going to learn from that. But having that internal monologue when you're tired, you're getting physically hurt, and like I say, try and bringing that needle into line is the challenge. And I think that only comes through experience. That only comes through putting yourself in those types of environments. How do you get as close as possible to competition environments in a training environment? I think because it's such a personal thing. It's such a personal thing to each athlete.
Mm-hmm.
Because the last Olympics, there was a viral video that went round. It was a German Olympic girl who I know quite well, actually. She's in the military, hard as nails. But the way that she gets hyped before a fight is the coach physically like hits her like slap round the face.
Wow.
Slap, slap,
Yeah.
like one each side, couple on the arms, down the legs. And that's her thing. That every competition, doesn't matter what level competition it is, she knows that is how she gets into a flow state, zone of optimal performance. And it's fine, we don't bat an eyelid. That's normal. I've grown up competing at similar competitions. She went to the Olympics, and this was, obviously it was, everyone saw it, and it was videoed, her walking on, getting, the steps up to the mat, and her coach, poof. Video went viral because coach beats athlete. Coach God. And you can imagine all the fallout, all the memes, and all that sort of stuff.
Of course, yeah.
But that, like I say, that is very personal to her. That is how she gets going, and she's a cracking fighter.
You talk about simulation. I mean, there's no. Well, we're animals at the end of the day. As far as if we're getting smacked around the face, it doesn't matter whether it's training, real. You can't switch those instincts off.
It's fight or flight, instigated,
absolutely,
I guess.
Yeah. And I mean, the fact of any flow state, including this, I'm sure you'll agree, is that there's no surefire way to engineer it. You can't. There's not a button. You can't switch it on or off.
That's the most frustrating thing, and that's what I think I was trying to sort of say earlier. It's like it's almost accumulative. Like, competition number 1 at that level, you won't get flow state. Competition number 2 probably won't do it. 3, 4, 5. Okay, now I might get a 5-second flash of it.
Mm-hmm.
But then when it becomes normalised, and you've done your, whatever, some athletes out there have done 4 Olympic Games. You've done your 4th Olympic Games, and everything pales into insignificance at that stage because you've done it. You've got you have. I suppose there's an element of like having something to prove. I don't know whether that ties back in with your own self-worth and competence or whatever, but it's like I think if you're doing something just to prove to yourself, there's probably a much higher chance that you're going to be able to achieve the flow state because actually it's all about you and you're in control. Whereas if you're doing it for other people, and I think looking back at my career, it was, money's tight. I've had to like flog myself to pay for this because it's, I wouldn't even go as far as semi-professional sport. It was an amateur sport. And so when you've, I've only got so much money this month, so I need to make this competition count. My coach is coming with me, and he's had to pay out of his own pocket, or all these external things. And this is where, and you heard it, you would have heard it. The English, I might misquote it, but the English Women's Rugby League bombed out of the semi-finals, and there's calls to make them professional because they can't compete against the other professional teams. And yes, that. Totally agree from a training perspective, professional, you get more time, But what you can't quantify is that the pressure that athletes will put on themselves because of the sacrifices they've had to make to be there. Whether that's family, financial, time, work, career progression. And it was only so I did my first career as a judo athlete, self-funded. And then I did my second career as a judo athlete in the army, getting paid good salary as judo athletes go. And the amount I managed to achieve in that, it was 3 years, but some of that was injured. So say 18 months I was competing effectively once I'd got up to speed and fit again. The amount I managed to achieve in that 18 months was more than, I would argue, I was competing internationally from about the age of 16 to 23, so 7 years. But that I managed to achieve more in 18 months than I did in 7 years, arguably. And there's you can always say there's a physical development curve and all that sort of stuff involved. But I think I'd put a lot of that down to less the stresses of money, time. I had a safe career. I knew I could go straight back into the army, and I think that had a big part to play in probably making sure that I spent more time in this flow state when I was fighting, which is when you fight best, because I'm not worried about all these things.
Yeah.
But in a real world context, you're never going to have no external pressures, really, in any walk of life. So I suppose it's how do you minimise those? How do you like self-care? How do you help yourself? Come to terms with the consequences. And I suppose a lot of it is almost flipping it on its head a little bit. Is what happens if I fail? And again, I'm thinking back to old me now, who's whatever at uni, working a part-time job and trying to train and compete internationally. What happens if I lose? Is I've just wasted 800 quid on flights and bombed out first fight and It's all you're almost really up against it.
I'm interested to know whether, and just from my own experience playing rugby league to a reasonable level and other sports, but there's something about that momentum of when one thing clicks and you feel good about it. And I think this is a creativity thing, but let's say, okay, to give you an example in rugby league, a dummy comes off and then you give a really nice ball and you miss a man and it leads onto a try and then you're in the zone. And there's something about that level of that, almost just gushing confidence flow where, and you hit up on it earlier, but it's not the positive voice thing. So there's two different ways of looking at it. There's you can tell yourself you're not going to lose or you're not going to fear failure and the rest of it. That's very different to feeling it on some animalistic level where you just aren't going to lose because you've got such zest and such flow. And I think, is there something, I don't know what the question is, but is that something you encounter where one thing goes right and you feel like, not necessarily creativity, but just something's gone really, you've pulled off a great move or you've evaded something and then it's like you get the hunger for more of that and it becomes this hot streak, so to speak.
Yeah, so I think that there's a few levels to that. I think just going back to like the feeling element, even before walking on for a fight, I will probably know whether I'm in the place to win it or not by the feeling that I feel stood at the side of the mat.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it comes back to all the external pressures and stuff, and it comes back to my own individual preparation and stuff. And I know that I'm ready to go on and at least fight my best fight. I get like the hairs on your neck stand up and all that sort of stuff. If I can, that's for me, that feeling, I know that I'm going to perform optimally. Whether or not the other person's better than me is a question of the fight. But I know that I'm in the best place that I am when I get the hairs on the back of your neck stood up. Right, I'm ready. And it's that in itself is practice and test and adjust and a real battle of self-talk. I don't know. I suppose in a fight, it's the sense of dominance, I would say, and I don't know whether that leads you into a flow state or it's the physical confirmation that you're probably wanting to tell yourself in that I'm stronger than this person. I'm better than this person. It's like when things click in a fight, it's almost that affirmation that you are going to win that fight because I can break your grip, because I can turn in for this, because I can lift you up.
And this is the thing. So in flow state, they describe it as the kind of perfect marriage of your abilities and the task at hand. It's like you hit the perfect middle ground. So you think of someone who's an absolute physical specimen like Erling Haaland, and of course, so coming on the pitch, there's a psychological fear factor for his opponents, knowing his previous record and just how damn good he is. But then for him, that's what's not to say he doesn't come on and he has a tough run against a defender and loses a bit of confidence. But it just seems that there's something about whether something clicks, whether it's gets the first goal, or just starts strong and then skins a defender a few times without actually scoring. And then it's like you said. Then I think what you said there, physical confirmation. It's almost like they've tapped into what they already had as a belief, but in a physical, like non-linguistic way. And I think that's interesting, especially as someone who's in a field where I don't necessarily have competition. It's always competing against myself because I've got an individual style. But it's that, I would liken that to when my pen hits the paper. If I like the first mark that I make, I'm in the flow state now. And now I don't have to think about it anymore because there's just something I can't articulate with language that comes about with the way that I move, and the way my mind synchronizes with my hand. And it's just, again, it's not sport, but it's still physical, and it's still
it's what I set out to do happened, and it's that confirmation. And if that loop continues to, I suppose I don't know whether it fits into flow state, because I suppose if you're thinking about that action and the outcome and blah, blah, maybe you're thinking too deeply, but that probably leads you to flow state, I guess.
That's it.
I guess it's the unknown. And so what I always say, and there's a really good documentary about it. What's it called? All about cycling doping, and then it goes into the Russian Olympic doping scandal. I can't remember what it is, but it starts about cycling. What I've always said is that I've fought lots and lots of people, and the minute you first grip up with someone, I can tell you with fairly good certainty. So, take away, what they look like, how big they are, just give me a pair of arms behind a screen. When they grip up on my gi, I can probably tell you how hard a time I'm going to have fighting them.
Right.
But by the feeling. And it's kind of like that first stroke. I will feel their pressure on my sleeve or on my lapel, and I'll think, oh God, this is going to be a tough fight. And looking back, they were mainly Russian. They mainly had large chins and large gaps in the teeth and big brows. But it going back to that feeling, that first thing, when I place my hand on someone and you feel that on you, and you're like, it's that I've got my grip. And how we talk about in judo is that, you're the motor, you're the car, you're the engine, but the only way that you can transmit your energy and your power and everything you want to do is rubber on the road. And so you need to get your tires or whatever to hit the road, and that's how you transmit your power, is by getting grip of someone. If you've got no grip, if you've got no tires, or they're not hitting the road, then you're not going to be able to transmit any of that power. There's 3 very simple things you need to do in judo: grip, move, throw. Grip, move, throw. The motor program really steps in. Is I've practiced this particular grip with my opponent doing that exact step 1,000 times. I'm in before I know it, because it's the smallest of feelings. I know that the opponent's doing, as they're doing that their foot's only going to move 6 inches, but that's enough for me. That's enough time for me to get my whole body in and lift them up with what I want to do, with what I've practiced 1,000, tens of thousands of times. But it all starts because I've gripped and moved.
I spoke to John McGuinness for this podcast, who's arguably the best of all time in time trial racing, 23 Isle of Man TT championships, and he describes himself as just a brickie from Morecambe who could ride bikes. His dad ran a bike workshop, exposed to it from an early age, totally attuned with his bike. But he talks, when I met him, he'd recently done these research experiments with Apple, and I forget how they were recording, but he was the heart rate and his pulse rate when he was hitting these land speed, speed records for a lap. I think it was 132 miles an hour on the bike. But he was the calmest of the lot. His heart rate was the lowest, resting lowest, and he was and he said that's the difference between the 2 or 1 seconds that will win him a championship over his nearest competitor. I find that truly fascinating, because that's so meta.
Yeah, well, they were talking about it on, I can't even remember where it was, but they were talking about Freddie Flintoff, who's on Top Gear. And they strapped. They were doing some crazy challenge, stupid speed or whatever. They strapped him up with heart rate monitors, And, you know, all the other presenters, heart rate through the roof, doing crazy stuff. Freddie Flintoff, he like almost like flipped the vehicle or whatever. And he was like cruising at like, you know, whatever, you know, 100 beats per minute. And he was just about to die or something like that. And I think it's almost that blocking out of everything other than the task. You know, clearly he's thinking, I just need to control this car a little bit better. Whereas others might be thinking, I'm about to die, sort of thing. And that's where, you know, when adrenaline increases, the fight or flight thing is really unhelpful. What I've found is that having done the 10,000 hours, that kind of concept of where you get to the point where sometimes you can't articulate why you do things. You do them because they work. Do you find, so my experience, I cannot teach beginners. I can only teach sort of elite-ish athletes or, you know, national level athletes, say, or whatever, because I find it really difficult to explain to a beginner who's come from a background of knowing nothing, to explain exactly why I do the things or the way that you should do things. Do you find that the same with if you were to explain to someone how you illustrate and, you know, illustration 101? Do you think that you'd do yourself justice? Because you're talking about, you know, that cake, like you can't quantify like the nib being caked and stuff. You can't say, oh, it needs to be 5/8 caked in ink.
No, you know what? I think you are. I think you're right there, because I think there's something about, and I wouldn't even put like an academic tier on it, but it has to be a person who's found a love for the thing, at least. I think. I just think there's a big difference between, let's say, someone who's 13 and they're in an art class because they've been told to go in an art class. Yeah. There might be one person in there who really clicks with something I said, but ultimately it's very much basic draft skills.
Yeah.
Whereas someone, let's say they're on BTEC or a degree, or even just come at a time in their life when they really want that and they know they want that for the right reasons for them, then they're attuned on a different level, I think, and they're likelier then to take something.
Perceive it.
Yeah, because you're right. There's a certain degree of subconscious learning.
I mean, I am half contradicting myself in the sense that those 10,000 hours need to be deliberate practice.
Yeah, I mean, you started at, was it 4? You said?
I started at the age of 5.
Wow.
I was not very good at ball sports. The bloke at Cubs shouted too much, ironically, in the army now. And I was pretty small. I was like the small. I've still got a photo upstairs. Me in my primary school, and you know how they do it by height order. I was the smallest kid in class. You know, smaller than all the girls as well. I think it was a little bit of self-defense stuff that my mum chucked me at. But yeah, it was just. I think there's an element of good coaches and also just a flair for it, I think, a little bit. Well, no, actually, I lie. That's bigging myself up. I didn't have a flair for it. I just worked bloody hard. and then it clicks and it comes back to that momentum thing. I got this one big medal and it was so long ago, it's difficult to understand what technically clicked. And it might have just been that I realised that judo was a fight sport. I had to be tough. And you had to be mean. There's like a killer. There has to be a mean element. You can't be the nice. I was, very fortunate, great parents, nice upbringing. You're not a natural fighter with that. And what you'll see is, Middle Eastern countries, Cuba, Russia, like where fighting is either part of the culture or part of their upbringing. They are fantastic on the mat because there's not that. There isn't, maybe even comes back to the flow state thing of they've been in so many fights, whether it's, mentally or physically through their lives, that judo match is just another fight. Mm-hmm. I've been to lots of different countries now and fought in training camps and in competition, lots of people. And you can tell the difference. I remember fighting one of the world's best, Georgian. He had a crazy name, Shavtatuashvili or something like that. And I was fighting him at a training camp in Turkey. And I was fighting him you do standing and on the ground fighting. and I was fighting him on the ground, and I started to get the better of him, and he world ranked number 5 or whatever, and I was, something in the the high 70s, and I started to get the better of him on the ground, and something flicked. He, all within the rules, but he had another level of viciousness that he unleashed on me, and that's where that resilience thing comes in, of the martial arts side, the mental side of, if I show an ounce that I'm about to crack, or that I'm finding this painful, or that I'm finding his aggressiveness uncomfortable, again, background of white middle class, not too much hardship, it comes back to that, having to put yourself in that scenario over and over again of being physically beaten and like actual pain. I've been in a couple of fights of that, like that before. I've also dished out a few of those where I've needed to be extra violent to beat my opponent. That's another element when it comes to a fight sport, is that just some of the physical pain, and it's not a fight sport, I suppose any contact sport really. Well, no, I won't even go that far. You could be in the hurt locker or doing a marathon. The physical pain, to separate that from the what's going on mentally, is really difficult. But how I experience that is the aggressiveness, viciousness of someone who you don't know really on a personal level, but is trying to hurt you, and trying to rationalize that in your head that it's and again, sometimes, if you're in a competition, you're looking at the ref thinking, are you going to let him get away with that?
Yeah.
Like, he's just smacked me, or he's just and all of those things are taking you away from that flow state. And so it's, and again, this comes back to almost gamesmanship, I guess, is, and you see it a lot in football. I don't really follow football, but you see it a lot in football. For every time that player is looking at the referee to act up to something, they're not in their flow state. They're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're too busy trying to play up to the referee. So my coach was very, very old school. He's German, Olympic team, but like really, really old. Like, I think he's from West Germany, no, East Germany, but like very, very old school. And it was towards the end of my career, unfortunately, but he sat me down and said, he noticed, he was the same coach before and after I joined the army. He noticed when I came back from the army, I could tap into another level of aggressiveness and viciousness, because I'd been and done some stuff and had some teaching, and I don't know, I'd had a mindset change from the pleasant university student to someone who, could be asked to go kill someone. And so that had created a different athlete that he saw. But he still said he needed more from me. I had to be more, and what he experienced, and it was actually at the first Grand Prix fight that I did, he noticed that I got hit with quite a vicious opponent, and it was a nasty piece of work. And it's not even accepting it or, being able to like tolerate it or whatever. You need to be prepared to meet it. You need to be able to give yourself, go to that next level of physicality and brutality, because if you don't, you're just going to get beaten up.